Since Christopher was a child, he liked movies about kind and brave doctors. The first time he saw such a movie was when he was 5 years old, and the doctor's act impressed the boy so much that Christopher learned two things that day. He wanted to be a doctor and a decent human being. The second thing meant a long journey and numerous ethical choices. The first thing was easier. He only needed to enter medical university and finish his studies. At least, that's what Christopher thought. Time passed. He finished high school successfully, passed the exams, and really entered the medical university. Unfortunately, it turned out to be not that easy. At school, Christopher arrogantly considered himself the smartest student. He was intelligent, well-read, with an analytical way of thinking. Teachers praised him and forgave him for a lot of things, skipping lessons and uncompleted homework. After all, he was the best student. One uncompleted homework assignment won't hurt him, he thought. Naturally, he had expected something similar at the university. Imagine his shock when it turned out that most of his fellow students were as smart as he was. During the first academic year, his reputation as a former top student was shattered. Now he needed to work very hard to get good grades. Suddenly, Christopher had to take off his rose-colored glasses and face harsh reality. Every new university course was more difficult than the previous one, and the final choice of the future specialty clawed at the core of his being. In the 6th year of his studies, he buried the dream of becoming an obstetrician-gynecologist. He was not ready to follow the path of his favorite movie characters so meticulously. However, the situation wasn't that bad. During the first 2 years, Christopher suffered a lot from lack of attention and lack of respect. But over time, his ego was cured, and he began to do everything he could to become the best. Again, by the end of his studies, his tutors described him as a promising student. "I think many other professors agree with me," said Edward, the supervisor of their faculty. "Christopher, all the pathways of medicine are open to you. Wherever you go, you will be welcome everywhere. But what specialty would you advise me to choose?" Edward, the man, took off his glasses and stared thoughtfully at one point. He looked at his hands for a while and then returned his gaze to Christopher. The professor had very deep blue eyes. He seemed to see through people. "Wrong question, young man," the professor remarked. "You better ask where I'd go if I were you. Do you see the difference?" Christopher shrugged his shoulders. "I'll explain it to you. I don't give advice. I don't want to take responsibility for your decision. But I can share the choices I would make if I were you. But you have to make the decision on your own." His words and the way he spoke it was always impressive. Edward was one of those people who easily earned the respect of students and colleagues. Christopher wished he could be the same. "What would you do if you were me?" "I'd choose surgery," the man replied instantly. "It's the most promising and highest paying field available to us. And don't even try to tell me that money doesn't mean anything to you. Money means a lot nowadays, Christopher." And it was true. Many people can shout, trying to prove that they work only for the idea and the well-being of people. But in reality, everyone wants a good job and a lot of money. Surgery definitely had its advantages. "Thank you for the conversation, Edward," the man nodded and extended his hand to Christopher. According to the rules of etiquette, it is the older man who should initiate the handshake first. It made Christopher feel better. He even felt a little arrogant again. It felt really nice when the distinguished professor shook his hand. To be a surgeon is a great responsibility, but the inner voice reminded him that any field of medicine is a great responsibility. Is Christopher still a very young man, ready to take a scalpel in his hands and save someone's life? And what happens if he makes a mistake? If he doesn't save someone? What then? At that moment, there were so many doubts swirling in his head that he even felt scared. He easily entered the medical university because he was inspired by the example of a movie character. But as time went on, he began to realize how difficult it would actually be for him. His parents supported him. His beloved girlfriend was also by his side the whole time. Christopher was one of those lucky people who fall in love with the right partners. Meredith was just such a person, and for more than 7 years, they had overcome all the hardships of life together. Meredith always listened to Christopher, always supported him, and helped him in any way she could. "I think Edward is right," the girl said after a short pause. "We have no right to tell you what to do. You can take any path you want. If I go into surgery, I can make a lot of money, and then we'll have a truly beautiful life." But Meredith smiled sadly in response. "If every day is going to be a real ordeal for you, then I don't want any money. Choose not something that will make you money, but something that will make you happy." After thinking for a long time, hesitating, he finally made a decision. The financial side was decisive. Besides, even if Edward, the experienced professor, said that Christopher had a bright future as a surgeon, why choose anything else? The education and internship took a long time, but finally, Christopher started an independent medical practice. He stayed in his hometown. Meredith loved this town. It was very modern and comfortable. "It will be very comfortable to live here with a child," she added and smiled. They were not married yet, but they were talking more and more about their future together. Of course, they wanted to have a baby and build their own house. But fate had other plans. Meredith couldn't get pregnant. She was very frustrated and sometimes even angry. Why do other women drink alcohol, smoke, have fun, and then they give birth to one baby after another? "I never drank alcohol, I never smoked, and I can't get pregnant. Don't I deserve a baby?" Christopher hugged the girl carefully. He could tell that, from the scientific point of view, all her arguments were nonsense. Unfortunately, nature does not consider such factors as obstacles to pregnancy, and some healthy people try for years and still can't get pregnant. But he was silent. Right now, he wasn't a doctor, he was a fiancé, almost a husband. She entrusted him with her most sincere emotions and waited for support. That's where Christopher's connections come in handy. When you are a young, promising virgin, many people try to make friends with you. Christopher was always friendly and sociable with his colleagues, so it was not a problem to go to the gynecology department. The head of the department, Dr. Thompson, listened to him attentively and said, "Christopher, you're a doctor too. You know very well that there are tons of reasons why your fiancée can't get pregnant. Without an examination, I can't say anything." "That's what I'm talking about." Christopher exclaimed emotionally, "Can you please examine her?" Dr. Thompson was the most famous gynecologist in the region. She never refused to examine or treat people with the most difficult cases, and she supervised pregnancies for the most famous people in town. That's why Christopher wanted this doctor to examine his fiancée. The woman looked warmly at him. "Of course, Christopher, I can't say no to you." She reached across the table and picked up a thick notebook, then flipped through it and stopped at the October page. "Unfortunately, the schedule is very tight, but I can examine her in 2 weeks." "In 2 weeks sounds great. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I'll never forget your kindness." Everything went on as usual. Christopher persuaded Meredith to go to Dr. Thompson. He convinced his beloved that if she could still be cured, only Dr. Thompson could help her. Meredith trusted her fiancé. After all, he knew medicine from the inside and could easily find a good doctor. But by that time, the girl was already exhausted. "I'm so tired of going back and forth," Meredith confessed. "All I do is go to doctors. I can't remember the last time we spent time together." "Everything will be all right, sweetie," Christopher replied. "We just have to be patient for a little while. You're not the one going through all of this." It sounded more harsh than Meredith meant it to, but Christopher wasn't offended. I understand how hard it is for you, kitten, he repeated time after time. But we'll get through it all. I'll support you and be there for you. They didn't know then that a visit to Dr. Thompson would be the beginning of a long, difficult journey. Meredith didn't answer the phone. Of course, Christopher was angry. He suspected that after the examination, the doctor had told the girl something she didn't like. But that's not an excuse to ignore him. He was nervous and dialed Dr. Thompson's number. She immediately answered, "Hello, Dr. Thompson, this is Christopher." "Hello, Christopher, how is Meredith doing?" "That's why I'm calling." He probably shouldn't have said that Meredith wasn't answering his calls, but Christopher decided to be honest to the end. He briefly explained the situation to Dr. Thompson. "I see, Christopher. I see," the woman repeated several times. "I think I can tell you the truth. After all, you are almost her husband. I've examined Meredith. Nothing unusual and nothing terrible. Just a typical case. She needs to undergo treatment before trying to conceive." And she briefly told Christopher about the problem. It turned out that Meredith had 2 cysts that had to be treated. And based on the tests, her immune system was very, very weak. It could be the consequences of the cyst, a common problem, especially at a young age. But I told her to get her thyroid hormone tests just in case. Do you think there's a problem with her thyroid? Of course, Dr. Thompson exclaimed a little indignantly. Men have no idea how complicated the female body is. Even the slightest problem can prevent conception. Can you imagine? That's why the first thing Meredith needs to do is to get treatment, and then she can think about getting pregnant. They talked some more and said goodbye in a friendly manner. Christopher couldn't understand what in Dr. Thompson's words could have upset Meredith so much. The doctor didn't even say the dreaded word, fertility, although modern doctors try to avoid such diagnoses. At least the good ones. 1 in 3 women or even more struggle with it. Why did she panic? It all came to light only in the evening. Meredith said that she had simply lost her nerve. "I already underwent treatment," Meredith repeated. "I've been diagnosed with a cyst before. I've been treated, and the doctor said everything was okay. Now, today, I found out that I'm not really okay." Christopher had to comfort her again, to tell her that Dr. Thompson was a great doctor. With her help, Meredith would be healthy in no time, and then they could plan the pregnancy. Do you really want to get pregnant now, when your body is so weak? Both you and the baby will be sick, Meredith. Think of your health and about our future baby's health. Those words from her fiancé worked. Meredith stopped crying and nodded in response. The baby's health was very important to her, so she agreed that the first thing to do was to improve her health. That meant the long treatment, at least a year long. That was Dr. Thompson's preliminary prognosis. Cysts can be treated without surgery, but it will take time to fully restore immunity and redirect the functions of the body, Dr. Thompson told Christopher. IVF might be necessary, he added. No, that's out of the question, the young man replied. For IVF, she would have to undergo hormone therapy. I don't want to take that risk, especially since she has 2 cysts now, and her hormones are already imbalanced. It's difficult to argue with doctors, Dr. Thompson grumbled kindly. You know everything better than anyone else. I'm not suggesting IVF right now, but it may be the only chance for you to conceive, Dr. Thompson persisted. We'll see, Christopher replied uncertainly, and they never discussed the subject again. Life went on as usual. Christopher understood that Dr. Thompson had warned him about IVF so that he could save up for several expensive procedures. She wished him well, but Christopher didn't want to risk the health of his beloved. He gradually earned a reputation as a great doctor, mainly because sometimes he saved hopeless patients and performed surgeries that even his more experienced colleagues refused to perform. They persistently discouraged Christopher. Let them go to another city to private clinics. It's not our problem, they said. But Christopher was sure of the opposite. Not our problem? Come on, we are doctors. We are obliged to save people's lives. Do you realize that they may not make it to another city? Everyone respected Christopher for that. He managed to remain a dedicated man, and his main goal was not the money but saving people. It wasn't easy to find a good pediatric surgeon. Besides, there must be a talent for convincing. There is no one more scared and distressed than a parent whose child is about to undergo surgery. What if something goes wrong? What if the baby doesn't wake up after surgery? What if the consequences are worse? Christopher was the one who listened to all of these fears. Colleagues were not supportive. Don't you have other things to do, they would say. Of course, he had other things to do, but these people trusted him, so he had to do his best. But there was another type of children, the special ones. An ambulance brought them to the hospital, but for some reason, their parents didn't accompany them. The first time this happened, Christopher recalled, I was very confused. I thought then that the parents would come later, but no one showed up. Sometimes orphanage workers visited such children, but they came to the hospital not to cheer up the children, but to fill out the necessary paperwork. They're independent, the caretaker once said, and left almost immediately. It was true, the children were really independent. Christopher realized that they could not have survived in a place like this any other way. The state provided orphans with everything they needed, but they lacked the most important things, love and warmth. So sometimes, they became aggressive and wild. When aggressive children were brought to the hospital, the staff always turned to Christopher for help. They complained that the orphans were stealing food and fighting with other children in the hospital. But what could Christopher do? Once he tried to talk to such a child. He was walking through the ward, and this little monster ran out at him, screaming and almost tearing his uniform. Christopher was very angry at the time. Who taught you to behave like that? No one, but I don't have a mom, so you won't complain to her, and no one will punish me, the child replied. Christopher was speechless then and didn't know what to say. A single child's phrase hit him hard and made him look at life from a different angle. Why did he even come to medicine? Because he wanted to help such children, to protect them from the fate of an orphanage. Then you should be a social worker, not a doctor, Christopher said to himself. The truth is, over time, being a doctor makes a person less sympathetic. Over time, all doctors become cynical and indifferent to other people's grief. Doctors don't care about the fate of every child they treat. It's a natural mechanism of the human psyche. The brain tries to protect itself from stress. If there wasn't such a cynical filter, doctors would go crazy with grief. But one little girl changed everything. The ambulance brought her to the hospital at night. It was Christopher's shift. She was complaining of severe abdominal pain. Her mother said it didn't stop for hours. She gave her daughter some pain pills, but when the girl felt even worse, she called an ambulance. The girl was lying in the ward now. Her mother was sitting next to her. Christopher suspected appendicitis, but he had to examine the child. Christopher approached the girl. She was looking intently into his face for some reason. The doctor felt uncomfortable with the child's surprisingly wise gaze. Well, let me examine you, Christopher began in a deliberately cheerful tone. He preferred to talk to patients in this way. Children were not afraid, and parents could relax because it seemed that there was nothing serious with the child. The girl didn't move and continued to stare at him intently. Christopher squinted his eyes. Are you afraid? Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you. I'm just going to examine you to see how to treat you. Doctor, she's deaf-mute, her mother said. Fortunately, Christopher didn't have anything in his hands, otherwise, he would have dropped it. For some reason, that fact shocked him. He looked at the girl's face. So that's why she's looking at him so strangely. She's trying to read his lips to see what he wants from her. So you must be her mom. I'm a caregiver, the woman in the chair straightened up. According to the rules, we can't send the children to the hospital alone, otherwise, communication between them and the doctor would be impossible. But the stress would increase. While the woman spoke, she gently stroked the little girl's hair. The child cuddled trustingly to her like a kitten. Christopher watched mesmerized. How old is she? Recently she turned 4. Only 4, but the girl didn't even look 4. She was pale and very skinny, but fate had already prepared so many trials for her. Can you ask her to lift up her shirt? I need to examine her. The woman began to move her hands actively, showing something. All these movements seemed chaotic and incomprehensible to Christopher. The girl nodded weakly and pulled the t-shirt up. Amazing, life has many sides that we don't think about until we encounter them, the woman commented politely. She continued to hold the girl's hand. The girl flinched, wrinkling her nose at Christopher's touch. Her name is Alice, looks like Alice needs surgery. The woman shuddered. Most likely, it's appendicitis. You'll have to take some tests. We already did, the woman replied quickly. So let's wait for the results, and then we'll prepare the girl for surgery. Don't worry, everything went well. Appendectomy is a complicated operation, but Christopher performs it very often, sometimes several times a day. It's pretty safe if you go to the hospital in time. But Christopher couldn't get the deaf-mute girl out of his mind. He thought about her before the operation, during the operation, even though everyone advises not to think about anything at all so as not to make an accidental mistake, and even after the operation. Alice would be discharged soon, but Christopher wanted to delay it as much as possible. He even went to the head of the department. He said that the child should not be discharged so early, she was still too weak, and it might be dangerous. Do you really think she's weak? She's running around the ward non-stop, playing with other kids all day. Yes, that's definitely what a weak child looks like. Still, I think we should be more responsible. After all, she's deaf, Christopher sighed. Let me be frank. You've gotten attached to this girl, made friends with her, so you don't want to let her go, am I right? It was pointless to refute, but Christopher couldn't say it out loud either. So he only nodded sadly. But no one's forcing you to let her go, the head of the department looked up. She's from the orphanage, the girl has no father or mother. If you're so attached to her, maybe you should consider adopting her. Christopher didn't think about that. The idea seemed wild to him. How could he adopt a deaf girl and take her home? Is such a thing even possible? Would the child welfare authorities let him adopt her? What would Meredith say to that? This stream of chaotic thoughts was interrupted by the head of the department. Think about it, she said kindly, politely pointing to the exit of the office. Dr. McCarthy had a lot of work to do, but Christopher's shift was coming to an end. Alice was already waiting for him. When she saw the doctor, she jumped up on the bed. Dr. McCarthy was right, she didn't look like a sick child. Her little hands began to show him something. Christopher was surprised to discover how many gestures he had learned in these 10 days. Are you all right? Melissa squinted slightly and looked at Christopher. I apologize if it's none of my business, Christopher, but you look so different. Is it hard to take care of a deaf child? Alice was showing Christopher new drawings at this time, and he was smiling. Honestly, it's not easy, after all, she's an unusual girl. How did it happen that you started working with deaf children? My younger sister is deaf, Melissa smiled sadly. Don't worry, she lives a full life, has a good job and many friends. Yes, she faces some limitations, but that doesn't stop her from being happy. You know, when we were kids, things were much more complicated. We didn't have as many opportunities as we do now. But today, the life of deaf children is much easier and more comfortable. They talked some more, and Christopher went home. Meredith was already waiting for him with more news from the doctor. He noticed that the girl spent all her free time going to different doctors. "Aren't you tired?" he asked caringly, and Meredith smiled tiredly. "Tired, but it's worth it. Is there something you wanted to talk about?" "Why do you think so?" Christopher said cautiously. "You and I have been together for so many years. I know you very well, my love." And then he told her the whole truth. He didn't expect Meredith to understand, and he didn't want to force her to accept the adoption of a disabled child. He told her about Alice, how wonderful she was, how much he wanted to help her. Meredith listened very attentively. When the story came to an end, Christopher avoided looking into her eyes. He was afraid he would see the answer in her eyes. But Meredith suddenly said, "Can I meet Alice?" "Do you really want that?" Meredith was silent for a moment. Her fingers trembled a little. It always happened when she was very nervous and tried to find the right words. "This girl has become very important to you. I would like, well, maybe we really should do this. Do you realize the difficulties we're going to face? Alice is deaf." "I realize that, but what if this is what fate wants us to do? What if fate didn't accidentally bring this girl to you, Christopher? Maybe we are the ones who should show the girl what love, care, and a normal family are." He hadn't expected understanding, hadn't even dared to hope, but Meredith was now saying exactly what he was thinking. It was as if she had read his mind. The next day, Christopher talked to Melissa. He told her of their intentions to try to adopt the girl. The woman rejoiced. "You are very young, and you have no children, so you have no experience in raising children. It won't be easy for you to adopt a child like Alice, but I'll do my best to help you. Can Meredith meet her? What if they don't like each other?" And then they never found out what would happen. As soon as Alice saw Meredith, she smiled and held out her little arms to the woman. They spent the rest of the days in the hospital together. Hospital rules forbade it, but the staff pretended not to notice. After all, Meredith was Christopher's fiancée, and very quickly, she had become his wife. They had been planning to get married for a long time, but had accelerated the process because it was easier for a married couple to get permission to adopt a child. After the child was discharged from the hospital, Christopher and Meredith came to the orphanage for deaf children several times. She was happy to see them each time until one day, all three of them left together, holding hands. It was cold December outside. The frost was tickling the nose cheerfully. Alice, like all the other children, was waiting for the Christmas miracle. For the first time, every child deserves miracles. It's an axiom that we should follow for life. Alice was lucky, but how many more such children are there all over the country, all over the world? Each of us should do our best so that there will be a little more warmth and happiness in their lives. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.